Hey everyone, there are people who pack a bag and go somewhere. And then there are people who pack a bag and without fully planning it, without quite knowing it's happening, go somewhere inside themselves that they couldn't have reached any other way. If something is calling you toward movement right now, toward a place, a change, a departure from the familiar, then maybe what's pulling you isn't the destination. Maybe it's the version of yourself that's waiting on the other side of the leaving. You've been in your life for a long time. That sounds obvious, but sit with it for a moment. You've been inside your own existence, inside its rhythms, its patterns, its particular arrangements of people and responsibilities and daily decisions for long enough that most of it has stopped registering as a choice. It just feels like how things are. The relationships, the work, the specific texture of your average Tuesday, not chosen in any active sense anymore, just continued, just the shape that life has taken and that you move through with varying degrees of presence, but rarely with the full, clear eyed awareness of someone who is actually seeing what's there. Because you can't fully see what you're inside of. That's just how perception works. The painting that's pressed against your face, you can feel the texture, you can smell the paint, you can know something about what it is, but you can't see it, not the whole thing, not in its actual shape, not with the clarity of someone who has stepped back far enough to take it all in at once. Distance is what makes the whole picture visible. Um, and something is calling you toward distance right now. Not necessarily across the world, though, maybe. Not necessarily for long, though, maybe. But toward some version of stepping back. Some form of departure from the immersive familiarity of your current context. Some movement, physical, emotional, both, that creates enough space between you and the painting to actually see what you've been standing inside of. That call, whatever specific form it's taking in your life, isn't accidental. The timing of it isn't random. Things call us toward movement when the immersion has gone on long enough that something important is being obscured by it, when the patterns that need to be seen have become too much the background to be noticed, when the version of yourself that exists outside the specific context of your daily life has been waiting long enough that the waiting has started to create its own pressure, its own urgency, its own quiet but persistent insistence that something needs to move. Now. Here's the distinction that matters most between the trips that are escapes and the trips or moves or changes or departures that are arrivals. Because both exist, both are real, and they can look identical from the outside. Same bag packed, same ticket purchased, same physical movement from one place to another. But internally, in what they're made of and where they're going and what they're capable of producing, they're completely different things. The escape is organized around leaving something behind. The from is primary. The to almost doesn't matter. It just needs to be somewhere other than here, somewhere that doesn't carry the weight of what's being moved away from. And escapes work temporarily. They provide relief, they create breathing room, they give you a break from the specific pressure of the thing you're running from. But they don't produce transformation because the thing you're running from, the pattern, the situation, the version of yourself that isn't working, travels with you in the bag, in the body, in the specific way you respond to things that is independent of the geography you're in. The arrival is different. The arrival is organized around moving toward something, not running from moving toward. And the toward isn't necessarily clear at the beginning. It doesn't have to be a fully articulated destination. It can be as simple as I'm moving toward more honesty about my own life, toward the version of myself that exists outside the roles I've been playing, toward the clarity that I can't seem to access from inside the immersion, toward whatever is waiting on the other side of this familiar context that I've been too inside of to see. That kind of movement with the toward as primary, even when it's vague, produces something different because it's organized not around relief from something, but around discovery of something. And discovery requires a particular quality of openness that relief doesn't, the willingness to find things you didn't expect, to meet versions of yourself that the familiar context doesn't allow, to let the distance do what distance does and reveal the shape of what you've been standing inside. And here's what happens in that revelation. What the distance actually shows you, because it's worth being specific about this rather than vague, because the specificity is where the transformation actually lives. The first thing distance shows you is what you've normalized. The specific things about your current life, about your relationships, your work, your daily patterns, the way you treat yourself, the things you accept that have become so familiar, they've stopped registering as choices. That just feel like how things are. Distance shows those things as choices, as the specific, ongoing, daily decisions they actually are rather than the inevitable facts they've come to feel like. And seeing them as choices, really seeing them with the clear eyes of someone who has stepped back far enough, changes what you can do with them. Because choices can be unmade, patterns can be changed, arrangements that feel permanent turn out, when seen from a distance, to be provisional, to be things that could be different, that in some cases probably should be different, that you've been continuing not because they're right, but because the familiarity of them has made the alternative feel more disruptive than the continuation. And from inside the immersion pressed against the painting, the disruption always seems larger than it actually is. Distance recalibrates that, shows you which disruptions are actually as large as they feel, and which ones only seem large because you haven't moved away from them enough to see their actual scale. The second thing distance shows you is yourself, not the contextual version, not the you that exists in relation to the specific people and roles and expectations of your daily life, but the underneath version, the one that was there before the context shaped it, the one that has preferences and responses and ways of being that are genuinely yours rather than adaptations to what the familiar environment has required. That underneath version, you meet it when you're somewhere new, when nobody knows you as the specific person you've been playing in your regular life. When the slate is clean enough that you're not being pulled toward the habitual version of yourself by the accumulated weight of other people's expectations of who you are. When you can try things, ways of speaking, ways of taking up space, ways of responding to situations that the familiar context has never quite allowed, and sometimes what you try surprises you. Sometimes the version of yourself that emerges in the new context is more alive, more direct, more genuinely yourself than the version that shows up in the immersion of the ordinary, and that's information, significant information about who you are when the performance stops, about what you're like when nobody is expecting you to be the specific person you've been, about the version of yourself that's been waiting in the underneath, in the not yet expressed, for a context that gives it room to exist. The third thing distance shows you is what you miss. And this one is complicated because what you miss from a distance isn't always what you expected to miss. Some things that seemed essential turn out when you're away from them to be more habit than necessity, more familiar than actually important, more about the comfort of the known than about genuine connection or meaning or fit. And some things, people, places, aspects of your life that you may have been taking for granted or not fully appreciating from inside the immersion reveal themselves in the missing as more real, more significant, more genuinely yours than you'd been allowing yourself to feel. Distance has a way of clarifying what's actually irreplaceable from what just felt irreplaceable because it was close. And then there's what you don't miss. That's equally significant, maybe more. Because the things you expected to miss and don't, the things that, once you're away from them, reveal themselves as weights rather than anchors, as obligations rather than genuine connections, as patterns rather than actual choices you'd make. Again, if you had the clarity you have from here, those things are telling you something. Not necessarily that they need to end, but that they need to be seen clearly, chosen consciously, rather than continued unconsciously, examined with the honest eyes of someone who has been away long enough to actually see them. Now, here's the thing about what doesn't fit back in the bag. Some things you discover on a trip or in any kind of significant departure from the familiar don't travel back. Not because you leave them somewhere else, but because once you've seen something clearly, you can't unsee it. The clarity of the distance, the honest, unimmersed view of what your life actually looks like from outside, that clarity doesn't disappear when you return to the context. It comes with you, and it changes what's possible because you go back different, not dramatically, not in ways that are necessarily visible to the people around you, but internally in the story, you tell yourself about what's working and what isn't, about what you need and what you've been settling for, about who you are when the context isn't shaping you toward the habitual version. You go back changed with a reference point you didn't have before. With the memory in the body, in the chest, in the specific place where real things land of what it felt like to be a slightly different version of yourself, a freer version, a more honest version, a version that fits who you actually are rather than who the accumulated context has been requiring you to be. And that reference point changes the choices you make when you return, which conversations you're willing to have, which silences you're no longer willing to maintain, which situations you can no longer look at with the same managed acceptance you had before, which version of your daily life you're willing to continue, and which parts need something, a conversation, a change, a departure, to bring them into alignment with what you now know about yourself. That's the transformation. Not the trip itself, not the experiences accumulated or the places visited or the photos taken, the changed eyes with which you see your own life when you return. The honest, clear, distance-calibrated view of what's actually there and what needs to move. And here's something worth saying about the permission that movement provides, about why some people need the structure of a trip, of being officially elsewhere, to be different, to try a freer version of themselves, to make space for something that the familiar context has been crowding out. The familiar context is full of expectations, not necessarily spoken, not necessarily imposed by anyone with bad intentions, but present in the way people know you, in the way situations have developed, in the accumulation of history that says this is who you are here, this is your role, this is how things work between us. And those expectations, however unintentional, have weight. They pull toward the habitual version. They make it harder to try something new because the new thing has to exist alongside everyone's existing understanding of who you are. but somewhere new where none of that accumulated history exists, where nobody is holding you in the shape of who you've been, the pull toward the habitual releases, and the version of yourself that's been waiting, the more honest one, the freer one, the one that fits who you've been becoming rather than who you've been has room, actual physical, contextual room to exist, to try itself, to discover what it's like to be in the world as this version rather than the familiar one. And sometimes, often, that version is better, not because the old version was wrong, but because you've been growing, changing, becoming someone whose edges have shifted, whose needs, values, ways of being in the world have developed, while the context around you remained shaped around an earlier version. And the mismatch between who you've become and who the context expects you to be has been creating friction, a quiet, persistent friction, the specific discomfort of being in a space that was built for a version of you that you've outgrown. The trip or the departure, the change, the movement toward whatever is calling gives that mismatch room to resolve, gives the new version of yourself permission to exist fully, and brings back someone who knows in the body, in the honest place, what fit actually feels like, what alignment between who you are and how you're living actually produces, what becomes possible when you stop organizing your daily existence around the expectations of a context that was built for someone you were rather than someone you are. That's what changes. That's what this movement, whatever specific form it takes in your life, is actually about. Not the destination, not the experiences, not anything external. The internal calibration that happens when you step back far enough from your own painting to see it clearly, to see which parts are truly yours and which parts are continuations of things that were never quite right. To see the version of the life that's available to you, the one that fits who you've actually become, that's only visible from a distance. Go. Whatever going looks like for you right now, whether it's across the world or across the city, or simply the internal departure of deciding to see your life with the honest eyes of someone who stepped outside it for long enough to actually look. Go with open eyes, not running from, moving toward the clarity that immersion can't provide, toward the version of yourself that exists outside the context that has been shaping you, toward the habitual, toward whatever is waiting on the other side of the familiar that you've been too inside of to see it isn't just a trip. It never was. It's the distance you needed to finally see the whole painting. And what you see there in that honest, clear, unimmersed view of your own life will change. What you're willing to come back to and what you're not, that's the transformation. Already in motion, already happening. In the pull toward the departure, in the call toward movement, in the quiet, persistent sense that something is waiting for you on the other side of the leaving. Go find it.